And as mentioned, Dr. Tim McKnight is our guest, of course, as we talk with the doc. And welcome in this morning.
Having me.
Be nice if I'd turn that on. So, yeah, good to see you again. And this morning we want to talk about something that people may not think is related, and it's cancer, which there are many kinds of cancer, but the role of diet and lifestyle in reducing the risk. So that is a possibility, right?
Absolutely. A lot of us feel like we're just helpless victims to this disease. And we know from just gathering the data and looking at mortality trends that heart disease has been the leading cause of death in the United States for decades, but it is soon going to be surpassed by cancer. So we have a small decline in heart-related deaths, heart disease-related deaths, and we're seeing a gradual incline, and they're almost meeting each other now. So probably within the next 5-10 years, we're going to see cancer as the number one cause of death in the United States. And you know, it's interesting because if you go back, way back in the beginning of time, archaeologists have found that dinosaurs actually had died of cancer, and that there was a mummy that was analyzed that lived 4,200 years ago, an Egyptian mummy who was found to have bone cancer. So it's not a new disease. It's part of life. In fact, in 1900, only 4% of Americans died from cancer. So it wasn't a prevalent disease. It's become very prevalent now because of our lifestyle.
Yeah.
So 35% of cancer deaths are attributed to smoking. The next leading cause of death from cancer is diet. It's not genetics. It's diet. So just think of that. There's a huge role with diet and lifestyle.
Are there particular types that are more prone to that?
Yes, there are particular types. And interesting, on the top 10 list of the most virulent or the most fatal cancers, 4 of these are related to the intestinal tract. So you're putting food into your mouth. It's not always the best. It's not always nature's food, and your intestinal tract is trying very hard to digest it or to eliminate it, and that's a stress on the digestive tract. So we see cancers of the esophagus, the stomach, the colon, the pancreas, and the liver. So there's actually 5 there. So that's another important point to just emphasize the importance of diet and the right diet. So we know a couple things increase your risk of cancer. Age, unfortunately, increases your risk because the older you get, the more likely it is to develop. Something else that a lot of people don't realize is your height. Taller people have a higher risk of cancer. And we think that's because they have more cells that are dividing, and more cells that can make an error in that division process.
This is one of the first times I've been happy to be short. So.
Yeah, you should be a little happier to be on the shorter end of the scale. But as far as our metabolism, one of the newest findings that I think is really worth pointing out is high insulin levels. So it's not, of course, that can be a diabetic who's not well controlled, but any of us who have high insulin levels because we eat too many sugars or carbs, sugars and carbs can increase your risk of cancer. And the reason is the more you have high insulin, so let's say you start off with Frosted Flakes for breakfast, you're going to shoot your insulin up. Then at 10 o'clock, you have a Coke, you shoot it up again. Then at lunchtime, you have a sandwich with 2 pieces of bread, you shoot it up. So you're snacking all day long on these foods that cause you to secrete a lot of insulin, and insulin is growth factor. Bodybuilders know this. Bodybuilders get extremely big muscular hypertrophy by using insulin. It can be dangerous if you don't eat enough carbs, but that just really helps the muscle development. But for most of us who aren't doing that, insulin causes more fat synthesis. We become overweight, but it's a growth factor, and it feeds cancer.
And people who don't know, carbs are turned into sugars by the body.
Right. And our bodies are continually dividing, and we're continually making errors as we replicate our cells. And if we don't correct those errors, then we have uncontrolled cell growth, and that's cancer. So imagine your immune system is working all the time to correct these, but now you're feeding these cells that are making mistakes growth factors that can cause them to just really ramp up the expression and the multiplication of these cancerous cells. Something I didn't realize was surgery can actually increase your risk for metastases. So let's say you have a cancer and you have a surgical procedure. Surgery can increase the risk of metastases. Now, it's not that we're not going to do operation if it's necessary, but if you've got an underlying cancer, or maybe you're not aware of it, it can actually accelerate the metastatic process. But they've done some studies, and they found that if people take an anti-inflammatory, which is interesting because cancer is an inflammatory problem. Insulin makes it inflammatory. But if they take an anti-inflammatory like 2 or 3 ibuprofen 40 minutes before surgery, it seems to really arrest or reduce the risk of metastases. Now, you're not going to have too many surgeons letting you take something like that before surgery, right? Because they don't want that in your system. They can cause bleeding issues, but it is noteworthy. We also have talked about smoked meats with nitrosamines. 35% of us are sensitive to these smoked meats and aren't able to metabolize them correctly. So some people are more at risk for developing cancer when they eat these processed meats in a sandwich. And then finally, what increases your risk, probably most importantly, is obesity. If your body mass index is greater than 40, you have a 62% increased risk of cancer. And if you look at the obesity graphs, the more heavy or obese you become, the higher your risk of cancer. Why is that? Well, normally obesity is caused by too much insulin because you're eating the wrong foods. It's inflammatory, and you're going to have it's a growth factor. It's like fertilizer for cancer. So as you lose weight, you can reduce your risk. So
what is a good BMI?
The ideal BMI is between 20 and 25.
Okay.
25 and 30 is overweight, which most of us are in that range, but 30 and above is considered high or obese. So we want to lower the cancer risk. Well, first thing, lose weight. Second thing, as you're losing weight, is you're probably going to reduce your insulin levels. And the way you do that is you eat fewer carbs and less sugars, and you do more fasting and intermittent fasting. That will all help you. They've done some studies on prostate cancer and found that alkaline diets reduce the risk of prostate cancer. And that may be true for all other cancers as well. I have a water ionizer. I think we've talked about that. It's very alkalizing, and it's got anti-inflammatory properties. So we're back to inflammation. They've determined that your pre-diagnosis level of vitamin D is very predictive of cancer, or can be very suppressive. So some people will start taking vitamins after they have a problem. We've talked about vitamin D reducing your risk of COVID illness. It's not something that works well when you start it after you're diagnosed. It works better as a preventive measure. So those people that have high vitamin D levels before they're diagnosed with cancer tend to do better. And they're even saying sun exposure might help us reduce our risk of cancer, because sun helps us make vitamin D. Here's a real interesting one: reducing your risk of cancer by exercise. Now, I came across this, and I thought this is perfect, because this is our message in Fit for Life. They did a study where they looked at people who did cardio 3 days a week and strength conditioning 2 days a week for 20 to 40 minutes. And it's not just kind of moving the weight. It's lifting weights where you're sore the next day, where you can only lift it 10 to 12 times before you fail. So, but it's only 20, 40 minutes. And then they took the blood from these participants after an exercise bout, and they dropped it in a petri dish with cancer cells. That blood killed the cancer cells.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So just being active is very protective. And then the last point I want to make is a healthy gut. A healthy gut seems to enhance the effectiveness of immunotherapy and chemotherapy. So in some oncological circles, they're talking about fecal transplants to try to get those correct bacteria, the right bacteria that are protective and help the immunotherapy work better into these patients. So it comes back to something, a comment that Louis Pasteur made on his deathbed. His whole life he thought it was all about the cell and what's happening in the cell and the genes in the cell. And even the Human Genome Project, we thought once we understood every gene, we could just knock out cancer. It hasn't proven to be true. A few cancers have been reduced by this technology. But Louis Pasteur said it's not the cell, it's the environment. And that's the same point that we're making with everything we talk about in the Fit for Life class and what we're talking about today. You have healthy cells that are designed to correct themselves when there's a mistake, designed to have an immune system to fight off infections and other toxins and eliminate these toxins. But if you constantly put these cells in an unhealthy environment and you don't move, you're going to be more likely to succumb to cancer. So it really does empower us to do a lot to prevent it. And again, too many people wait until they've got it, and then they want to get really aggressive. And I think you do the best you can. And I will say that when there's cancer, what you don't want to do is feed the cancer with a lot of carbs and sugar, because insulin is what's going to be secreted. It's a growth factor. So that's the one clear approach I would take with any cancer, is really start to do more fasting, intermittent fasting, and lower the insulin level. Some people do that naturally because they don't want to eat, and maybe that's sort of a protective and a preserving response. But we can do a lot, and the hardest thing for most of us is to reduce our carb and sugar intake. But if we'll do that, we'll be able to lose weight, we'll lower the inflammatory state, which will reduce the risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, acid reflux, osteoporosis, and on and on and on, hypertension, everything.
I tease you and say that we always wrap up every segment by saying eat more leafy green vegetables, but it's mostly true.
It is true, and I guess it's the same message with a different angle. We're trying to maybe sometimes scare people, sometimes motivate people, sometimes give people hope, but it really is the same message week after week.
It is indeed, but it's an important message. So
extremely important.
Thank you.
We all want to be empowered. You're welcome.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. As we talk with the Dr. Tim McKnight on this morning with us, and it's being brought to you, has been, by Mako's Pharmacy,